Charleston had a softness to it after dark, the kind of stillness that made you feel like the whole city was wrapped in a warm quilt. Porch lights flickered gently through sheer curtains. The breeze carried the faint scent of jasmine and river water, and the Spanish moss hanging from the oak trees swayed like old secrets being whispered between them. Everything was quiet, familiar, predictable. And that's how Ava Morgan liked it. She moved like someone who knew the world wouldn't give her peace unless she claimed it herself. A tall, graceful woman in her late 30s, Ava walked with a calm that didn't come from naivety. It came from training, from knowing how to measure your breath, your step, and your fear. She had spent the last 2 hours at the East Liberty Community Center teaching a free self-defense class for women, just like she did every Thursday. Not because she needed to, but because someone had once done the same for her. Her black cotton dress hung just below her knees, paired with sneakers that had seen better days but still held strong. Over one shoulder, she carried a worn canvas bag, weighed down with protective pads, foam gloves, and hand wraps. The other strap held the weight of responsibility, though Ava never talked about it that way. She simply called it doing her part. As she turned onto Beaufin Street, the cracked sidewalks and leaning mailboxes greeted her like old friends. Every chipped step and uneven curb was part of the rhythm she knew by heart. This wasn't just her route, it was her ritual. The walk home was the one time her mind could drift, not out of worry, but out of calm. She knew the late-night rhythm of this neighborhood. A dog barking in the distance, an upstairs window closing, the occasional creak of someone's back porch swing. But tonight, there was something else. It started with the low hum of tires rolling just behind her. No screech, no engine rev, just a slow, deliberate presence. Ava didn't turn around. She didn't need to. After years of competing in Taekwondo tournaments, training in situational awareness, and surviving the everyday gauntlet of being a woman walking alone at night, she could feel eyes the way other people felt temperature. And this wasn't a passerby or someone pulling into their driveway. No, this felt different. She glanced sideways at a shadow cast by the street lamp behind her. It was long, boxy, government-issued. A cruiser. Still, she kept walking. One step after another. Her heart didn't race, her breath didn't catch. But her senses sharpened, her shoulders squared. She noted the alleyways to her left, the distance to the gas station on the corner, the sound of her own footsteps shifting ever so slightly on the gravel where the pavement broke. The cruiser didn't flash its lights, didn't use the siren. It just followed, slowly, deliberately, like a question waiting to be answered. She passed a storefront with the words, "Linton's Dry Goods," painted across the awning. It had closed down months ago, but its window still reflected movement. She caught a glimpse of the vehicle then, dark blue, two figures in the front, silhouettes backlit by a dashboard glow. She kept her pace even, steady, unchanged. For anyone else, it might have felt like paranoia, but Ava had learned long ago. Intuition is not fear, it's recognition. At the next corner, she slowed ever so slightly, not from hesitation but calculation. She turned left. So did they. Still no sirens. Still no voice through the speaker saying they needed to ask her something. No announcement. Just silence and steel and the pressure of eyes. A part of her, an old part that used to ache with wanting to be understood, might have hoped this was coincidence. But Ava didn't believe in coincidences anymore. She passed an old green bench near a bus stop. She passed the familiar mural on the side of Vincent's barbershop, the one of a smiling grandfather holding a fishing pole. She passed the spot where Mrs. Lawson's cat used to sleep under the hibiscus hedge, and still, they followed. Not fast enough to be threatening, but not slow enough to be innocent. The cruiser kept its measured pace just half a block behind, inching closer each time she crossed a streetlight's shadow. Ava didn't speak, didn't look back. She just adjusted the strap on her bag and moved forward, step by step, thought by thought, every muscle quietly coiled in readiness. The night didn't scream, but it whispered, "Something is not right," and Ava heard it loud and clear. Have you ever seen injustice unfold in real time? If you believe in dignity, self-worth, and standing tall in silence, subscribe to Heart Touch Stories Like and leave us a comment below. The next few minutes might just shift the way you see power, silence, and strength. The cruiser continued its slow crawl behind Ava, tires whispering against asphalt like something too cautious to pounce but too bold to hide. She didn't speed up. She didn't break stride. But her awareness expanded like a ripple in still water. Behind the wheel sat a young man barely out of academy shape, his buzz cut tight, posture relaxed in the smug way only a uniform and unchecked power can allow. In the passenger seat, another officer leaned his elbow against the window, laughing, saying something that made the driver smirk. A third officer sat in the back, tapping something on his phone, until he glanced up and caught sight of Ava's figure moving in the streetlight. His expression shifted, not alarmed, not curious, just amused. Then the window rolled down. "Well, well," came a voice, smooth but dipped in sarcasm. "Ain't you a sight tonight?" Ava didn't respond. She didn't even glance their way. A second voice joined in, lower, heavier, the kind that didn't need volume to carry insult. "Ain't it past your curfew, sweetheart?" She'd heard that one before, not just the words, but the cadence, the practiced confidence of someone who thought they were untouchable. She kept walking. The cruiser inched closer. From the open window, the first voice called out again. "You got a name? Or should we just call you Trouble?" Laughter followed, brief, mocking, boys on a dare laughter. They didn't expect a response. They didn't need one. This wasn't about communication. It was about control. Ava adjusted the strap of her bag, not out of tension, but out of discipline. She'd been trained to move with purpose, to show no unnecessary energy. Everything about her posture said, "I am not available for this moment." They didn't notice. Or maybe they noticed and didn't care. The cruiser rolled up beside her, close enough now that the passenger leaned a little farther out. "Hold up," he said, snapping his fingers once. "Wait a second. Aren't you—" "Yo, Brent, isn't that the girl from that martial arts thing on ESPN?" The backseat officer, Brent, perked up, leaned closer, squinted. "Yeah," he grinned. "No way, that's her." The driver slowed even more. "No kidding. Weren't you that karate girl? Thought you'd be more glamorous up close." They laughed again. Ava kept her gaze forward. Her pace didn't change. Her breathing remained level. It had been nearly 10 years since she'd been featured on national television. Twisting through the air, breaking boards mid-flight, earning a gold medal with a knee that would later cost her everything. But her face had stuck in people's memories, especially those who needed someone to mock because they didn't know how to admire. Brent opened the back door and stepped out. Ava heard the creak of the door before she saw his shadow approach, long and careless beside hers. "You really her?" he asked, walking in sync with her now. "That kickboxing chick?" Ava didn't look at him. He wasn't asking a question. He was offering bait. "You used to knock people out, right?" he went on, amusement building in his voice. "Guess now you're just kicking it in the hood with the rest of your people." She still said nothing. He waited. A beat. 2. "Girl like you out here alone?" he added. "Wearing a dress like that, some folks might get the wrong idea." She didn't stop. So he did. Just behind her now, Brent reached down, quick, casual, and flicked the back hem of her dress upward, not violently, not forcefully, but enough. Enough to violate, enough to shame. The sound of laughter burst behind her, sharp and unkind, like glass breaking somewhere far away. The horn honked twice, like punctuation. Ava stopped walking. She didn't turn around. Not right away. For one full breath, she stood still, utterly, completely still. Not from fear, not from confusion, from calculation. She'd had medals pinned to her uniform, had stood barefoot on podiums while crowds screamed her name. She'd trained under masters who'd made her hold stances until her muscles trembled, not because they needed her to be strong, but because they needed her to understand stillness was also a weapon. And in that moment, she called on all of it. She turned, slowly, deliberately. Her gaze found Brent first. He was still smirking, but it faltered the moment their eyes met. Ava said nothing. She simply looked. And he, cocky, uniformed, armed, took half a step back. She tilted her head slightly, measured, calm. "You think this is funny?" she asked, her voice low, clear, but firm enough to cut through the summer air like a blade. Brent tried to recover, chuckled nervously. "Relax, it was just a joke." "No," she replied, stepping forward. "You don't get to joke about me, not tonight." The shift in her body was almost imperceptible. A slide of her weight, a repositioning of her feet. He raised a hand, defensive now, not aggressive. "We were just messing around," he muttered. And then it happened. In one fluid motion, she reached out, grabbed his wrist, twisted it behind his back and stepped in, guiding his body down into a bend with such precision he let out a grunt before he knew what hit him. The other officer bolted from the cruiser, but Ava didn't even glance his way. As he rushed forward, she pivoted, used his momentum against him, and drove her elbow clean into the soft space just under his ribs, where the armor didn't reach. He dropped to his knees, gasping. The driver stayed in the car. His hand hovered near his holster, but he didn't draw. Ava stood there, tall, centered, breathing like someone who had nothing to prove and everything to protect. She looked at them, two groaning, one frozen, and said nothing. She didn't need to. Then, as easily as a breeze shifting direction, she turned and began walking again. Back into the dark, back into the silence. Only this time, the laughter had stopped. Only this time, they were the ones standing still. The silence after her question was heavier than the heat hanging in the Charleston night. Brent's mouth opened, then closed. His bravado had evaporated, scattered like loose ash in the wind. He hadn't expected resistance, certainly not from someone who hadn't said a word until now. "You think this is funny?" Ava repeated, quieter this time. Not angry, not loud, just clear. Brent shifted on his feet. His smirk flickered again, but it didn't land. He gestured vaguely, like someone trying to wave away their own mistake. "It was just a joke," he said, voice tight. But Ava had already seen enough. With precise control, she reached for his wrist, not fast, not wild, but with intention. Before he could process what was happening, his arm was behind his back, his torso twisted downward, and his center of balance belonged entirely to her. She didn't yank or shout. She just moved. Years of muscle memory did the rest. She adjusted her stance, grounded her heel, and kept her breathing even. Brent let out a sharp, involuntary grunt as his knees buckled beneath him. Then came motion from behind. The second officer had exited the cruiser. He was running toward them now, all instinct and no thought, one hand half raised like he might stop her with sheer presence. Ava turned with fluid grace. She didn't hesitate. As he lunged, she stepped into his path, using his own momentum against him. Her elbow rose in one swift arc and landed clean, just beneath his ribcage, right where the body armor thinned out. He gasped and stumbled, the wind knocked out of him. She didn't press forward, didn't follow through. No fists, no rage, just a single, effective correction. The street returned to stillness. Behind the wheel of the cruiser, the third officer, young, pale, jaw clenched, remained frozen. His hand hovered near the radio, then shifted toward his holster, then back again. He watched her. She turned toward him. And that was enough. He didn't move. Ava stood there, framed in the glow of a dim street lamp. Her black dress swayed slightly in the breeze. One strap of her canvas bag had slipped partway down her shoulder, but she didn't reach to fix it. Her breath rose and fell in steady rhythm. In that moment, she wasn't a martial artist. She wasn't a community instructor or a woman walking home alone. She was something else, something the uniform didn't prepare them for. She held the space, not by force, but by presence. Then she turned and walked away. Not fast, not flinching, just moving forward like someone who had already made her decision before the night ever started. Behind her, no one followed. Brent was still crouched, eyes blinking, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The second officer leaned against the hood of the cruiser, hand pressed to his side, breathing in shallow pulls. The driver just watched her fade into the dark with the same quiet authority she'd entered with. No badge, no backup, no fear. Just a woman who had learned long ago that real power doesn't require permission to be felt. She didn't look back, didn't need to. She could feel the shift behind her, the embarrassment, the disorientation, the unraveling of what they thought control looked like. They had expected fear. They had found calm. They had expected confrontation. They had found mastery. They had expected someone they could reduce to a laugh, a moment, a punchline. Instead, they found a mirror. Ava's steps were lighter now, not from relief, but from release. Her body no longer held the weight of their expectations. She had returned them, neatly, precisely, without cruelty. Just truth. She turned onto a quieter street, past the mural of Rosa Parks that someone had retouched after a recent act of vandalism. She glanced at it briefly, as if it nodded at her in solidarity. The night air smelled like magnolia and old wood and something else. something earned. She reached her building without a single misstep. The stairs creaked the same way they always had. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. Behind her, several blocks away, the cruiser had yet to move. She imagined them still sitting there, not out of injury, but out of uncertainty. Not wounded, just exposed. What do you do when the story doesn't go the way you planned? What do you do when your target doesn't shrink, when she doesn't cry, when she doesn't call for help, when she simply walks? Ava slipped her key into the lock and entered the soft stillness of her apartment. It smelled of sandalwood and lemon balm, the way she always liked it after teaching. She placed her bag by the entryway, kicked off her sneakers, and stretched. No shaking, no panic, just presence. In the mirror by the hallway, her reflection looked back, shoulders straight, jaw relaxed, eyes clear. She didn't need to practice power. She had spent enough years learning how not to misuse it. She brewed herself a small cup of chamomile tea, left her phone on silent, and lit a candle near the kitchen sink. As the flame settled, so did she. She knew the world might not understand what had just happened, but it would feel it. The next morning, the precinct didn't feel the same. Charleston Police Department's District 5 station usually buzzed in the early hours with the clatter of boots, half-shouted jokes, and the hiss of burnt coffee. But not today. Today, the air was brittle. Conversations were clipped. Laughter, if it happened at all, ended too soon. Even the rhythm of keys tapping against plastic ID cards sounded hesitant. Something had shifted. Sergeant Colleen Hughes, a 20-year veteran with a knack for reading people faster than paperwork, felt it the moment she stepped into the break room. Officer Delaney sat stiffly at the edge of a metal chair, eyes locked on a half-full coffee cup, like it might say something first. Across the room, Brent leaned on the vending machine, shoulders hunched, chewing the edge of his thumbnail. His partner, Simmons, paced near the window, pretending to scroll his phone, failing to hide the wince in his posture. No one said a word about the night before, but the silence was louder than any confession. By mid-morning, Sergeant Hughes received an internal memo from IT, a quiet flag. A 2-hour gap in body cam footage had been found on one of the patrol units, 12C. No traffic stops, no citations, no field reports. Just a digital blackout from 10:27 p.m. to 12:36 a.m. Not protocol. Not even close. She raised an eyebrow and slid the email into a separate folder. An hour later, Internal Affairs received an anonymous message in their complaint inbox. 5 words. Check Patrol Unit 12C. Something happened. No signature, no elaboration. But something about the tone, a calm certainty without accusation, made it feel different from the usual noise of interdepartmental politics. Junior investigator Daniel Reyes opened the logs. He cross-referenced GPS coordinates, streetlight movement, and badge IDs. He found nothing, and everything. No reported incidents, no official stops. Just a cruiser winding through quiet residential blocks, trailing a lone pedestrian for several turns, then doubling back to the station. Not a single action recorded. No tickets, no complaints. But the timestamps aligned with the blacked-out footage. The cruiser's path matched a pattern, circling the neighborhood where Ava lived. That was the first ripple. The second came from the dry cleaner 2 blocks from Ava's building. A security camera, old but functional, had captured a grainy clip. 3 men stepping out of a cruiser, one of them doubling over near the hood. Another leaned against the vehicle, hand at his ribs. The third, he never left the car. Reyes watched the footage 4 times before picking up the phone. Back at the precinct, Sergeant Hughes had begun to notice how Officer Delaney had stopped making eye contact, how Brent flinched slightly when someone raised their voice too fast, how Simmons hadn't checked in for physical training that morning, citing stomach issues with a chuckle no one found funny. She didn't press them. She just waited. By Thursday, Delaney cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the way a dam leaks before it breaks. He knocked on Sergeant Hughes's office door, stepped inside, and closed it behind him. His hands trembled, barely noticeable, unless you were the kind of person who spent 2 decades watching nerves unravel. He didn't sit. "I need to talk to someone," he said. "Then talk," she replied gently. Delaney stared at the framed certificate on her wall, the one she kept not for pride, but as a reminder. Integrity is doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. His voice barely carried. "She didn't fight us," he said. Sergeant Hughes tilted her head. Excuse me? She didn't attack, he repeated. She stopped us. I don't even know how. 1 second they were joking and then… He shook his head. She didn't raise her voice, didn't threaten us, just looked at Brent and then moved. It was like watching someone do something they've done 1,000 times, but without anger, without retaliation. Sergeant Hughes leaned forward, her hands folded on her desk. Did anyone touch her? Delaney hesitated. The shame came before the words. Brent did, he said, lifted the back of her dress. Silence stretched. I didn't know they'd… I thought it was just jokes, he added, his voice breaking. But she just walked away. Like it was done, like she didn't need us to understand. Sergeant Hughes exhaled quietly. When Delaney left her office, she picked up the phone and called Internal Affairs. The investigation began before Ava ever spoke a word. In fact, she never would. Not to the press, not to the police, not to anyone, really. She still taught her class on Thursday, still walked the same route home, still sipped her morning tea and read community newsletters folded into her screen door. The world may have been tilting underfoot, but her ground was steady. What no one expected, what they couldn't process, was that she didn't ask for justice. She didn't demand headlines. She didn't seek punishment. She simply refused to disappear. That was more unsettling than any lawsuit, more potent than any protest. Her silence wasn't passive. It was purposeful. The precinct couldn't contain the story. Whispers traveled faster than memos. A dispatcher mentioned an incident. An admin assistant noticed Brent hadn't logged any activity since that night. Someone brought up Ava's name, said they remembered her from a billboard outside a gym in North Charleston years ago. Ava Morgan, strength starts within. The photo had faded. The memory hadn't. By Friday, Captain Morton Brantley called Brent, Simmons, and Delaney into his office. No one argued, no one interrupted. When asked what happened that night, none of them gave the same version. But the through line was clear. They had followed a woman, mocked her, touched her without permission. And she responded. Not violently, but fully, completely. And they didn't know what to do with that. Brantley didn't yell. He just stared for a long time before picking up the phone and saying, "Open a formal review." Ava, meanwhile, was folding laundry. The rhythm of her day hadn't changed. Her phone buzzed more than usual. Old teammates, a former sponsor, someone from a local newspaper who left 3 voicemails in a row. She ignored them all, because none of it mattered. She hadn't acted to make a point. She had acted to reclaim space, to stand still when others expected her to shrink. At the precinct, Internal Affairs recovered a deleted body cam segment. They found a report labeled draft only, with timestamps that didn't match the logs. A junior tech flagged the cruiser for internal data sweep. The final confirmation came in the form of a single sentence in the official review. The civilian did not escalate. The officers did. That one line, dry and factual, hit harder than any headline. It passed from desk to desk, email to email, until even those with no connection to that night began to look inward. What else had they ignored? Who else had they underestimated? The ripple wasn't public, but it was powerful. Sensitivity trainings were suddenly mandatory. Night patrols were restructured. A memo about respectful engagement with community members hit every inbox by Monday morning. Brent was placed on administrative leave. Simmons took stress leave without notice. Delaney requested to speak with Internal Affairs a second time. And Ava? She kept walking. The city didn't make announcements, no front-page headlines, no press conferences, no sweeping reforms proclaimed under bright lights. Charleston wasn't that kind of town, but change came anyway, quiet, deliberate, and slightly embarrassed of itself, like a child pretending it already knew better. Ava didn't seek it. She didn't demand anything. She had spoken only through movement, held her ground with presence, and walked away when others would have shouted. And somehow, her silence, echoed louder than any rally could have. Inside the department, small things began to shift. A cruiser was reassigned. A desk was cleared before HR could file the paperwork. New protocols were issued, dressed up in formal language like community conduct review and personal boundaries refresher training. But the people behind those memos knew what they were really about. One officer, Brent, was officially suspended. Another resigned before the hearing. The third, Delaney, started seeing a department therapist, citing stress, guilt, and something else he couldn't quite name. He didn't mention Ava's name anymore, but her presence had taken up residence in his memory. Not as a threat, not as a mistake, but as a weight he hadn't earned the right to carry. What unsettled them most wasn't what Ava did. It was what she didn't do. She never filed a complaint, never gave a press statement, never posted a vague Facebook status or called for accountability. She kept walking, kept teaching, kept showing up. And in doing so, she made them realize how much they had expected her to disappear. She hadn't screamed, hadn't lashed out, hadn't asked for anything to be fixed. She had just refused to shrink. And in that refusal, they saw something they couldn't explain. Something that made them question the badge, the silence in their locker rooms, the laughter they once shared too easily. One afternoon, nearly 3 weeks after the incident, Ava sat outside her favorite cafe on Rutledge Avenue, sipping iced tea on the bench beneath the awning. The sun was soft that day, casting more light than heat, and the trees rustled like polite applause overhead. She had just finished teaching a class where a new student, a mother of 2 in her 50s, had quietly cried after her first successful takedown. Ava had stayed late, listening, not giving advice, just letting the woman hear herself breathe strong again. As Ava stirred her tea, a figure approached cautiously from the sidewalk. Male, early 40s, off-duty uniform slung over one shoulder. His posture wasn't defensive, it was thoughtful and uncertain. "Ms. Morgan?" he asked. She turned slowly, not startled, just curious. "I work at the precinct," he said, eyes not quite meeting hers. "I wasn't there that night, but folks are talking." Ava waited, not encouraging, not stopping him. "They're not scared of punishment," he admitted. "They're scared because they don't know what you'll do next." Ava looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, just slightly, just enough. "Neither do I," she said. He nodded, not in agreement, but in recognition. And then he walked away. The city continued. People went to work, children played, tourists posed by fountains. But those who had heard the story, those who had pieced together the whispers and the silence and the discomfort, looked at Ava differently now. Not like a victim, not like a vigilante, like a threshold. She wasn't trying to become a symbol. She wasn't a myth. She was real. She taught classes, she overcooked rice sometimes, she forgot to water the plants on her balcony, but she had also changed something. She had drawn a line with her stillness and made others realize how often they crossed it. A week later, Ava walked the same path she had walked that night. The air felt cleaner somehow, as if the city had rinsed itself after a long cry. She passed the same mural of Rosa Parks. Someone had touched it up again. New outlines, new color in the eyes. The sidewalk at the corner had been patched. A fresh square of concrete now covered what once held shame. Above, a newly installed security camera blinked red, watching from the utility pole with quiet vigilance. No plaque explained its presence, but Ava knew. She paused beneath it, looked up. Let the moment register. Not fear, not pride, just memory. Then she adjusted the strap on her canvas bag and continued on, her steps soft but unyielding. Her shadow stretched long in the early evening light, reaching ahead of her like the next chapter waiting to be written. They had tried to reduce her to a moment, a misstep, a headline, a story they could control. Instead, she had become a mirror, and for once, they couldn't look away. If this story moved you, help us keep telling real stories that honor strength, silence, and the power of dignity. Subscribe to Heart Touch Stories, share this video, and remind the world, never judge a person by how quiet they seem. You never know what strength walks beside you.